It started with a sentence so simple that I almost ignored it. My son was sitting on the carpet, lining up his toy cars with the kind of concentration only a child can have, when he suddenly stopped and pointed toward the bedroom. His finger was small, steady, and certain. "Daddy," he said, his voice calm and matter of fact, "I saw Mommy's friend in the closet." At first I smiled, assuming it was imagination, the way children blur dreams and reality without effort. Kids invent friends all the time, invisible people, monsters under beds, heroes in corners. I told myself this was no different. But something in the way he said it, so casual, so sure, made my chest tighten. I asked him what he meant, trying to keep my tone light. He looked at me as if I were slow to understand. "Mommy's friend," he repeated. He was standing there. He told me to be quiet. The room felt suddenly smaller. The air seemed heavier, pressing against my ears. I laughed again, louder this time, forcing normalcy into the moment. But my mind had already begun to race. We didn't have guests. My wife hadn't mentioned anyone coming over. And the closet he pointed to wasn't one a child usually paid attention to. It was tucked into the corner of our bedroom, a place filled with coats, boxes, and things forgotten. Children say strange things, I reminded myself. They absorb words they don't understand and repeat them at random. Still, a quiet unease crept in, unwelcome and persistent. I knelt beside him and asked what the friend looked like. He shrugged, uninterested now, already pushing his cars again. He was big, he said. He smiled, but not nice. That was all. No fear in his voice, no excitement, just a statement, as if he were describing a chair or a lamp. I stood up slowly, my heart beating harder than it should have. Memories I didn't ask for surfaced late nights, when my wife came home tired, unexplained smiles at her phone, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I had dismissed them all as stress, coincidence, my own insecurity. Now those dismissed thoughts lined up neatly, each one suddenly sharp and relevant. My rational side fought back, insisting this was absurd, that I was letting a child's imagination unravel my peace. But doubt has a way of slipping through the smallest cracks. I looked back at my son. He had already moved on, lost in his world, unaware of the storm he had just started. Innocent words spoken without intention had planted a question I could not unhear. Whether it was fantasy or something far more real, the seed was there now, growing quietly in the pit of my stomach. And no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. Once doubt enters a home, it never stays small for long. The house had never felt so unfamiliar. Every sound seemed amplified. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the soft tick of the clock on the wall. These were noises I had lived with for years, sounds that once meant comfort and routine. Now they felt like warnings, each one reminding me that something was wrong. I moved through the hallway slowly, as if the walls themselves were watching me. The closer I got to the bedroom, the more my chest tightened, my thoughts circling the same question over and over. What if my son was telling the truth? Our bedroom door was half open, the way my wife often left it. Sunlight spilled across the floor, illuminating the bed, the dresser, the framed photos of happier moments. Everything looked exactly as it should, which somehow made it worse. Normalcy became suspicious. I scanned the room, noticing details I had never paid attention to before: the slight indentation on the mattress, the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine, the closet door that sat just a little too perfectly closed. It was absurd to jump to conclusions, yet my mind refused to slow down. I told myself to stop. This was my home. There was no reason to be afraid of it. Still, my steps were cautious as I approached the closet. My hand hovered near the door handle, not touching it yet, as if that thin barrier separated truth from denial. I thought of my wife, of the years we had spent building this life together, of the trust that had once felt unbreakable. Doubt gnawed at me, turning every memory into something fragile and uncertain. I hated how quickly suspicion could rewrite the past. From the hallway, my son's laughter drifted in, light and carefree. The contrast was unsettling. He was safe, oblivious, while I stood frozen, trapped between belief and fear. The closet itself seemed ordinary wooden, white, painted, slightly scuffed at the bottom where shoes had bumped it over the years. Yet in that moment it felt like the center of the house, a silent keeper of secrets. I imagined it breathing, hiding something just beyond reach. I stepped back, forcing myself to sit on the edge of the bed. My pulse thudded in my ears. This was ridiculous, I thought. Children misunderstand, they exaggerate, they dream, but then another thought followed, colder and harder to ignore. Adults lie. And they do it far better. The idea settled in my mind, heavy and unwelcome. The safety I had always associated with these walls began to erode, replaced by a creeping sense of exposure. I looked around again, and this time the room felt hostile. Shadows gathered in corners where light didn't reach. The air seemed thicker, as though it carried words that had been spoken in whispers. This space, once private and reassuring, now felt compromised. The realization hurt more than fear ever could. It wasn't just about what might be hidden in the closet. It was about what might be hidden in my marriage, in the person I trusted most. Standing there, surrounded by familiar objects that no longer felt safe, I understood how easily peace can turn into paranoia. A home is only secure when trust lives inside it. The moment doubt enters, even the quietest room can become a place of tension, and every closed door begins to feel like a threat. The words "Mommy's friend" kept replaying in my head, each time sounding heavier than before. At first, I had treated them like a harmless phrase, something vague and childish. Now they felt deliberate, loaded with meaning I didn't want to face. My wife had friends, of course. Co-workers, neighbors, people from the gym. That was normal. But my son hadn't said a name, hadn't described someone familiar. He had said it as if the label itself mattered, as if this person existed only in relation to my wife, and in secret. I tried to reason it away. Maybe he had overheard a conversation. Maybe my wife had mentioned someone in passing, and his imagination had filled in the rest. Children absorb tension the way walls absorb sound. They notice what adults think they hide. Still, a sharp edge of jealousy cut through my attempts at logic. The idea that there could be someone else, someone close enough to be called a friend, and hidden close enough to be whispered about, made my stomach twist. Memories began resurfacing, uninvited and relentless. The late evenings when my wife claimed meetings ran long. The way she angled her phone away from me, her screen lighting up with messages she didn't explain. The sudden interest in new clothes, a new perfume she said she bought just for herself. None of it had seemed significant before. Trust has a way of smoothing over rough details. Now, each memory sharpened, fitting too neatly into a pattern I had refused to see. What hurt most wasn't just the possibility of betrayal, but the secrecy implied by it. A hidden relationship isn't just about affection misplaced. It's about deception woven into daily life. It's shared smiles that don't belong to you, whispered words meant for someone else, truths carefully edited before being brought home. The thought that all of this could have been happening under the same roof where I tucked my son into bed made my chest ache. The house felt tainted, like a stage where a performance had been playing without my knowledge. I wondered what my son had really seen. Had there been laughter, hushed and playful, a presence that didn't belong, standing where only coats and boxes should have been? The idea that a stranger, or worse, Someone familiar had been close enough to tell him to be quiet filled me with a quiet rage. That wasn't just betrayal between adults. It was a boundary crossed into the innocence of a child. Whatever the truth was, it had reached farther than I could accept. At the same time, fear crept in alongside anger. What if I was wrong? What if suspicion destroyed something that was still intact? Accusations once spoken can never be fully taken back. I imagined confronting my wife, seeing confusion or hurt in her eyes, realizing I had let paranoia win. The thought of being that man, the one who let doubt poison his marriage, terrified me almost as much as the alternative. Yet the question refused to go away. Secrets thrive in silence, and the silence between us suddenly felt loud. Trust, I realized, isn't shattered by proof alone. Sometimes it cracks under the weight of unanswered questions. And as I stood there, replaying my son's words again and again, I knew that whatever was hidden truth or misunderstanding, it had already begun to change everything. I stood in front of the closet for a long time before touching it. Time seemed stretched, warped by the steady thud of my heart and the constant hum of thoughts I couldn't silence. My hand finally closed around the handle, cool and smooth, grounding me in the moment. This was it. I thought the line between wondering and knowing. Once opened, there would be no going back. Whatever waited on the other side would replace every theory, every fear, with something solid and undeniable. I pulled the door open slowly, bracing myself for anything. My eyes scanned the darkness inside, adjusting to the lack of light. Coats hung neatly, shoes lined up below, boxes stacked just as they had always been. For a split second, relief washed over me, so strong it almost made my knees weak. Nothing was there, no stranger, no secret figure hiding in the shadows, just the familiar clutter of everyday life. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, a quiet laugh escaping my lips at the absurdity of my fear. Then I noticed the box. It sat behind the coats, pushed farther back than the others, its lid slightly ajar. I didn't recognize it. That alone was unsettling. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cardboard, and pulled it forward into the light. Inside were things that didn't belong in a closet, at least not ours. A folded jacket that wasn't mine, darker and heavier than anything I owned. A pair of shoes, clean but worn, unmistakably too large to be my wife's. My stomach dropped. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a misunderstanding. These were real, tangible signs that someone else had been here. My pulse raced as I sifted through the contents. A phone charger I didn't recognize, a key on a ring with no label, small, ordinary objects, yet each one felt like a confession. They told a story without words, one I wasn't ready to hear but couldn't stop reading. This wasn't just a visitor. This was someone who had planned, someone who had left pieces of themselves behind, confident they wouldn't be found. The room seemed to tilt, the walls pressing in as the weight of the discovery settled on me. My relief twisted into dread. The truth wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet and suffocating. That made it worse. There was no confrontation yet, no explanation to cling to. Just evidence and silence. I imagined how easily these things could have stayed hidden, how close I had come to closing the door and walking away, never knowing what lay inches behind my wife's clothes. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps. My wife's voice followed, calling my name, casual and warm. The normalcy of it sent a chill down my spine. I stood there, holding proof of a life I didn't recognize, wondering how long she had been living it. The moment felt suspended, fragile. I could put everything back, close the door, pretend I hadn't seen anything. Or I could step forward and shatter the illusion we had both been maintaining. As her footsteps grew closer, I realized the true shock wasn't what I had found in the closet. It was the understanding that the reveal didn't end the mystery, it only deepened it. The real truth wasn't just about who had been there, but why, and how long the lie had been standing quietly beside me, waiting to be discovered. I didn't confront her right away. That surprised me about myself. I had always imagined that if betrayal ever touched my life, I would react instantly: anger, accusations, demands for answers. Instead, I stood there frozen, the weight of what I knew pressing down on me harder than any outburst could. Trust doesn't vanish in a single moment. It fractures, slowly and painfully, until you're left holding pieces that no longer fit together. In that silence, I realized how fragile our family truly was. When my wife stepped into the room, she smiled, unaware that everything had changed. She asked what I was doing, her voice casual, familiar. I looked at her face, searching for cracks, guilt, fear, anything that would confirm what I felt. But she looked the same as always. That hurt more than if she had looked nervous. It meant she had practiced this normality, perfected it. I answered her calmly, too calmly, and watched relief flicker across her expression. In that moment, I understood that trust isn't only about honesty. It's about the courage to be honest, even when lying is easier. That night, after our son was asleep, the house felt unbearably quiet. I sat alone, replaying the day, realizing how deeply this situation had already affected him. A child should never be part of an adult's secrets, never be asked directly or indirectly to keep them. The thought that someone had told him to be quiet, to hide something from his own father, filled me with a protective anger I couldn't ignore. Whatever choices my wife had made, our son had been dragged into them, and that crossed a line that couldn't be erased. Fear followed close behind the anger, not fear of losing my wife, but fear of what would happen to our family if the truth came out, or if it didn't. Children sense tension long before they understand it. They feel the shift in tone, the pauses in conversation, the way hugs become shorter and smiles more forced. I realized that even silence was a decision, one that could quietly damage my son just as much as the truth might. The idea that he would grow up in a house filled with unspoken resentment terrified me. When I finally spoke to my wife, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, almost clinical. I told her what our son had said. I told her what I had found. Her face drained of color, and in that moment the last thread of doubt snapped. She tried to explain, her words tumbling over each other, justifications, half-truths, apologies that came too late. I listened not because I believed her, but because I needed to understand how far trust had eroded before I noticed. What broke me wasn't the confirmation of betrayal, but the realization that our family would never return to what it was. Even if we stayed together, even if we tried to rebuild, something fundamental had changed. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply heal. It leaves scars that shape every future moment. As I looked toward my son's room, I knew my responsibility was no longer just to a marriage, but to protecting the sense of safety he deserved. That night, I understood the hardest truth of all. Sometimes discovering the truth isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a far more difficult one, where every choice must be made with the fragile heart of a child in mind.